Let me begin by laying it out there. This video does not contain any anti Semitic sentiments. It's not an objection to the citizens who live and reside in the modern nation state of Israel or anyone who ethnically or religiously identifies as Jewish. There was one point in my life that I was employed at the JCC and I have friends that were Jewish. And so I'm not critiquing individuals here who are Jewish. I'm rather commenting or critiquing and reporting on the corporate structures, the apparatus, and sometimes they're individual representatives of the entities that operate from the modern nation state of Israel and its potential implications for the future of the one world financial infrastructure, which is happening as I record this video. I believe that all people are made in the image of God, and God Himself desires all humanity to come to know Him in truth. So that's really at the core of the message here. Now, I've been looking at this topic and trying to put together this video for several weeks, and it's crazy how things happen in the real world to provide solid data points that back up my overall thesis. And the overall thesis here is that the next iteration of technological advancement as it pertains to the economic infrastructure, whether it be due to a financial crash, which we're already seeing the instabilities, or by way of gradual and steady progress, either way, will continue to steer the world towards the fulfillment of certain eschatological passages found in the scriptures. And I'd like to begin with this document that was published on July 9th of 2019 by the Israeli Securities Authority as an example or a launching point into how this modern iteration of this changing financial landscape, especially in financial technology, Fintech, how that is going to really create a world where certain eschatological passages are much easier to be fulfilled, especially in this highly technologically advanced world where people are already microchipping in their hands and attaching their brains to computers. So here's what the document says, quote, Governor of the state of New York, Andrew M. Cuomo, and Israel's three financial regulators, supervisor of banks at the Bank of Israel, Hedva Ber, head of capital markets, Insurance and Savings Authority, Moshe Baraket, and chairwoman of Israel Security Authority Anat Gueda, announced today an agreement between the New York State Department of Financial Services and Israel's regulators to encourage and enable cross-border innovation in financial services technology, otherwise known as Fintech. The purpose of the agreement is to encourage fintech innovation in New York and Israel by providing support to fintech companies and to enable information sharing regarding this fast developing domain. End quote. So this fintech boom is inevitable. It's already here. And it will be part of the changing landscape as we dive right into the 2020s. With the UN 2030 agenda looming over the entire world, all of us, including you and I, will have a role to play in how these technologies develop. And in certain ways, we don't have any control. But how we are able to continue to spread the gospel and get as many souls saved in the process, that's not going to change. That mission should be ongoing to make disciples of all nations. That shouldn't stop just because the technology is changing. In fact, we do it until we know when it's not appropriate, as warned in Revelation 13. So these types of conversations are likely not taking place in many churches, or if the topic of financial technology is brought up in churches, or at least maybe within the church leadership, it's probably in relationship with how it can help their bottom line, because most churches now run as businesses. It's kind of the landscape of the way things are. And that mixture of corporatism and church has really stalled and stifled and caused a lot of trouble in terms of what the church is supposed to represent. I know everybody sees it, but in any case, I think in that regard, the topic of financial technology needs to be addressed from this more prophetic or at least eschatological point of view, where scripture warns of certain events to take place, as outlined in Revelation 13, for example. To get an idea of what the financial technology industry looks like, there's a document here on pwc.com, Financial Services Technology 2020 and Beyond, Embracing Disruption. And the little blurb here says, to succeed in this rapidly changing landscape, IT executives will need to agree with the rest of the management team on the posture they wish to adopt. Will they try to be industry leaders, fast followers, or will they just react? Whichever direction they choose, they will need to devise a clear strategy to move forward. I mean, why? Why every single IT executive in the entire world has to do this? Why? Because of the changing landscape of financial technology, how it's going to be disruptive, according to these guys in this research here. And it's not like this is crazy talk or just fringe conspiracy ideas or anything like that. Again, these documents understand what's happening here. If you look at the sections for this document, there's an entire part called Asset Management 2020, A Brave New World. So, look, this is already in the minds of people. It has been the blueprint all along. And we're really at a phase now where this is going to accelerate very quickly, so it's going to be very important for the majority of the people who decide to use the internet, which is a lot of people on this earth. We're all going to have to be educated, more educated on how the technology works and what it means to be private and secure as these things continue to change, what it means to have actual ownership of your finances. Okay, this is a changing thing where in the digital world, if you are the only person that knows the key to access that money on the internet, then you have sole possession of that digital money. And again, I'm not going to get into the technicals here because that's a whole can of worms that even I'm still dealing with and having a hard time keeping up with because, there are people who understand code a lot better than I do. I don't really understand it to the point where I can really do code, but that's where all the nitty-gritty stuff is happening. But then there's this larger philosophical conceptual area where ideas about how information is stored, how it's transferred, how it is secured, how it is locked, all those things are working in this tidal wave of change in the way money operates. And money itself, again, is just a medium of exchange. So let's keep that in mind. So, just to give you a quick example of how this is changing everything, this is a look at blockchain technology. What is it? And it says the blockchain is a decentralized ledger or list of all transactions across a peer to peer network. Using this technology, participants can transfer value across the internet without the need of a central third party. This is why Bitcoin is so revolutionary and people are freaking out about Bitcoin, is because the network itself is just a bunch of computers all over the world that are all collectively upholding the data for this giant network, which is called Bitcoin, the Bitcoin protocol. And all the transactions, all the new wallets, everything that's done on that blockchain is being recorded and people can see it. Everybody can see it. Now, there's pros and cons to that. And there are actually new coins that have technologies built into them to keep that peer to peer transaction private. And so that's going to be sort of the next iteration of how we deal with this oncoming change and how some of the regulators are going to have to deal with it in terms of, hey, are they going to ban some of these things? They can't really ban it because, again, they would have to take down every single computer in the entire world. There are quantum protection technologies that are already being discussed and developed. So, look, we're going into sci-fi world, and so things are changing very rapidly. And again, obviously, there's ongoing questions, there's ongoing theories about how it may work or may not work. The bottom line is it's moving forward. It's going to be at our doorstep any moment now. So I think it's important for us to at least get a grasp of what they're talking about, what the technology does, this blockchain technology. And I know some of you guys are already very privy to this, but I really want to get this message out there, especially to the church believers. Understand what this is because you guys are going to be using it here in the next few years. So, how it works, someone requests a transaction. So I say, hey, Basil, send me some money. The request transaction is broadcast to a P2P network consisting of computers known as nodes. So every computer acts as a node, okay? And you can kind of start to see that the language they use with clusters, with sharding, there's all sorts of ways in which the network itself connects the nodes, all these participating nodes. Some are called master nodes. So you have these bigger clusters. So again, you can see how this is kind of like a brain, right? I think you guys sort of understand what this whole structure or infrastructure is beginning to look like. Authentication, the network nodes validate the transaction using cryptography. And this is the power of it. The computers, they all look at this transaction and they say, okay, yeah, that's true. And then another computer looks at it and they say, yes, that is true. I also agree that it's true. And then this happens to multiple computers. And then after a certain number of computers says, yeah, that's an actual real transaction, then it becomes permanent. Okay. And that data is stored in blocks. And that's why it's called blockchain. And so a verified transaction can involve cryptocurrency, contracts, records, or other information. Okay. So with Bitcoin, it's just money. It's just digital money. There's nothing else really in there. Okay, it's just money. That's why it's being considered a store of value. People are starting to pour dollars into it because they see that if the dollar devalues, they have something Bitcoin, which is gonna go up in value. And we saw that recently with these weird, crazy crashes in the stock market when Bitcoin starts shooting up. But that's just one example. It's not always like that. It hasn't always been like that. But in any case, so what are cryptocurrencies? Cryptocurrency is a medium of exchange such as the US dollar, created and stored electronically in blockchain or in the blockchain using encryption techniques to control the creation of monetary units and to verify the transfer of funds. So in this diagram, it says here it has no intrinsic value in that it's not redeemable for another commodity such as gold, which is not entirely true. There are certain projects in the works right now that tie cryptocurrencies to actual physical gold. It's difficult to do, but again, this is where this is where ideas like microchipping comes into play in a sort of verification mechanism, right? And you can see how this is all building up to an infrastructure that is clearly the mark of the beast. Can't buy or sell unless you have a mark in your hand or in your forehead. Just so obvious when you start looking at it. But anyway, there's still a long way to go here. It has no physical form. It is not currently backed by any government or legal entity. Currently, but I think this is going to change. There are some governments that are just having to deal with it because they've completely demolished their government issued currency. And so they have to deal with Bitcoin. And that's happened around the world. And I'll leave links to lectures and stuff of people discussing those topics. Its supply is not determined by a central bank, and the network is completely decentralized. Okay, this is the key point. These protocols, this apparatus, because it has lowered the barrier of entry, participating people, right, in this financial infrastructure. The control of the network cannot be done by a central bank. And this is why I think central banks are going to try to create their own cryptocurrency and come out with their own systems where they have the same sort of capabilities of keeping track of everything, but use it under this jurisdiction of, hey, it is the government's blockchain. And so everything that is recorded on this government blockchain is, obviously belongs to the government. And right now, it's a little bit of a gray area with corporations owning that data and them selling it to the intelligence agencies. There's a whole market there. And that's part of the reason why YouTube and everything has been changing so quickly. It's the exchange of information, where that marketplace is, whether it's following legislation or not. And that's been the whole big thing with everything happening, is that because of these technologies have lowered that barrier of entry, now there's really no way of clearly understanding if you're breaking the law or not in terms of some of these things. Like, hey, if I get some Bitcoin, am I breaking the law? Technically, no, I'm not breaking the law. There's no law that says you can't own Bitcoin. But what if they say, hey, everybody that owns Bitcoin is now a criminal? Well, they can say that. But in reality, in practice, it's not going to make a difference unless they are willing to jail like everybody in the world that has Bitcoin. And at a certain point, this is going to spread out to more and more people around the world, not just Bitcoin, but just in general cryptocurrencies and this sort of financial infrastructure that they're going to have to deal with it. They can't necessarily lock everyone down, or can they? And when it does happen, it's going to have to be verifiable by this authority. And that's where, again, we're talking about the mark of the beast here. And you can see how the technology itself, the infrastructure of the tech itself, just is just ripe. It's just perfect for a mark of the beast system to arise. I'm pretty convinced, but if you're not convinced that this is leading to that eventually, then I don't know. I don't know what to say, right? I mean, I think people have been seeing this type of thing coming with credit cards and barcodes, and that's been happening for sure. But this is a huge leap in that direction. And again, we're just going to have to be very vigilant and very watchful. And because we're going to be involved in this technology, we're going to have to know how it works as much as possible to protect ourselves and our loved ones and to be able to continue spreading the gospel, because that's what's really important here. Man, it's crunch time. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to have to get that gospel out there to people because this is coming. So, anyway, getting all riled up here. All right, so let me just continue. Oh, before I move on from the cryptocurrency section, back to the verified transactions that involve cryptocurrency contracts. That's where smart contracts come in, records or other information. So, the idea here is with these systems, you can collect your all the data that that we are getting collected by Twitter and Facebook and all these different corporations that are out there. The idea here is that they won't be able to do that anymore based on the technology, not because of some legislation, but based on the technology. If we participate or decide to participate in certain infrastructures that don't allow that, then Facebook and Twitter and all those guys that that are trying to collect all that data, they're going to be severely limited. Their ability to traffic in our data is going to be limited in that they won't be able to sell it. Instead, again, barrier of entry is lowered. It doesn't mean it solves it, but the barrier of entry is lower. What the technology will allow us to do as individual citizens is to decide whether we want to sell our own data or not. Okay, the data will still probably be there, but access to it, we might be able to control a lot better and say, you know what, these medical records, okay, you know what, I can authorize these medical records to this medical facility because, I need to verify or at least authenticate with them that, hey, this is really me, this is my information. And in that regard, this is much more helpful. It puts a lot more responsibility into your own hands. But, and some people don't like that, but the reality is the more responsibilities we have, that means the more control we have over this type of structure, over the data of this structure. So this becomes something that completely changes the way in which corporations are able to even collect our data and sell it to third parties, such as other advertisers or intelligence agencies, whatever the buyer happens to be. So when we go in here, we have the unknowns, complex technology, regulatory implications, like I've been talking about, implementation challenges, that's another big one, and competing platforms. Right now, there's no clear winner. The clear leader is Ethereum as the smart contract platform, and of course, Bitcoin being the main cryptocurrency. Now, again, no one controls Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is decentralized the most out of all of these technologies because it's just free, it's open source, everyone can participate in it. You can just open a wallet and all of a sudden you have Bitcoin, right? You can have a private key and you are the only person that knows it, especially if you memorize it. So it's very interesting that this is changing the responsibility of holding your own information, and that includes digital money as we move into this future here, and relieving the central banks of that responsibility. Now, I know we rail on the central bank and stuff, but they sort of are there to take care of a lot of the heavy lifting, right? They're there to make things quote unquote easier for us, right? But of course, the abuse of power there is apparent. And so this system says, okay, central banks, we're taking your power away because you're really irrelevant in this new infrastructure. They're going to just have to deal with it. And that's what's coming. They're probably going to come out with their own thing. They're going to try to survive, whatever. It's going to be a long battle here, but that's probably taking place at least for a little while. I can see a phase of this type of revolution, quote unquote, happening very quickly. The flip side of that, like, great, yes, central banks going down, awesome, golf clap, this is fantastic. The flip side to that is that, okay, all the responsibilities that the central bank was taking care of, okay, we give it to you now, the individual. You have to take care of all these things.
We have finally reached a point where access to the most basic financial services has become a privilege. A privilege that the average person has to exercise this dance of proving themselves worthy in front of a banker, of filling in reams of paperwork and application forms in order to be granted the privilege of financial services. And we even turn around and condemn cash, the ultimate peer-to-peer, anonymous, fungible mechanism that for millennia has provided financial services to everyone. And cash has one fatal flaw, and it's not that it's anonymous. That is its greatest feature. And it's not that it's used by criminals. Criminals get a banking license and defraud people by the millions. Its greatest feature is that it is available to everyone without vetting. Its greatest feature is that it is an open transparent, neutral, verifiable, peer-to-peer transactional system. And its greatest weakness is that it is constrained by geography and locality. It doesn't have range and scale. And now we have a new form of digital cash, which is also open, and it's also neutral and verifiable, unforgeable, transportable. But this one is borderless. It's censorship resistant. It can be used even when your government doesn't want you to use it. It can be used without privilege, without identity. And it can be used everywhere in the world by whoever wants to use it by simply downloading the software and running it on whatever computing device they can afford. That is the real revolution here. And while we're having a little privileged discussions about should we regulate crypto, how much should we regulate crypto, who should regulate crypto, that crypto is about providing universal basic finance to whoever needs it, everywhere in the world, whether we like it or not. And what will people do with universal basic finance? What they've done for millennia with access to cash. They will build a future for their children.
There's another part of this that's really interesting, and that's security and this idea of encryption and internet security, all that kind of stuff. There's a description of the man of sin, the Antichrist in the book of Daniel, that alludes to being one with the God of fortresses. There's a lot of different interpretations for that, but I find it fascinating because the word fortress is basically security, a fort, a protection, and the sort of digital analogy to that is remarkable. But let me keep going here. So those are the unknowns, and then the benefits are increased transparency. So corporations can't be as corrupt, central banks can't be as corrupt. So again, positive thing. Accurate tracking, right? All the computers in the world are keeping an eye on the information and can't change the information. You can't just go into Bitcoin and say, you know what, that transaction, it didn't happen. I'm gonna erase that data. You can't do that. All right, unless you take control of. I believe in Bitcoin. I could be wrong about this, but I believe in Bitcoin. If you get control of 51% of the computers or more, you can technically override transactions. But that's very difficult to do, and that's going to become more and more difficult to do as every single day more people are connecting to the Bitcoin network and helping secure it. Everybody participates in securing the network. So that's what the accurate tracking is about. You have a permanent ledger, again, permanent thing that everyone can look at, and cost reduction. That's huge. The cost reduction thing is humongous because central banks, let's say you have a buddy in Africa and he really needs money right away to help out his community. Maybe they need water, they need something. And you're like, all right, I got this money. I'm going to send it over to you, but I got to go through the bank and they're going to take a huge chunk and then it's going to take 2 weeks. And it's a whole deal, right? With Bitcoin, I can be like, all right, give me your Bitcoin address. That's a public address, not your private key that lets you access it. He has that, right? But he gives me his public address and I send him some Bitcoin. And for a small fee, the network fee, which is much less than bank fees, like minuscule compared to bank fees, he will get the money and then he will be able to, exchange Bitcoin into whatever currency he needs to make things happen for him in Africa. And so really the control here happens at the on-ramp levels. And that's a really important point. Because what we're seeing here, what I started with that document about New York and Israel cooperating in the fintech revolution, they're talking about managing the on-ramps and off-ramps from the traditional fiat money into these new distributed systems. They want to keep track of as much people as possible in that system. The problem is that takes a lot of resources. The resources that they don't necessarily have. And that's why they're trying to create their own. That's why maybe Facebook, started Libra. Libra is really an arc for certain traditional systems. That's why Visa, that's why MasterCard, and even Uber, those companies are all helping their entire, quote unquote network. It's actually not a blockchain, but something called a Merkle tree, which is a different data structure. And it's pretty clever, but at the same time, it's not blockchain technology. So just if anyone says, hey, it's just like Bitcoin, no, it's not. Facebook Libra is completely different with the technology itself. So the applications of this technology is going to happen in automotive, especially with more driverless autonomous cars. That's how this is going to operate, folks. People are like, how are cars going to know where to go and how, the blockchain. It's going to just map everything, and your car is going to be on the blockchain and in real life. It's almost like real life is secondary to the blockchain. This is how the world is going to turn into in terms of verification, in terms of confidence in another person's transactions. This is really interesting because right now we have government documents to identify who we are. If we go to the grocery store and we're like, hey, I want to buy this bottle of wine, you can get carded, right? They'll be like, hey, let me see your driver's license or whatever to verify that you're over 21 here in California. So that happens. So a government document is sort of third party that is in there to verify a transaction between me, a person, and a corporation. And so as things go on, that's going to be less and less important. That third party, we're going to be able to identify on our own. Like, hey, here's my digital info here that proves me for who I am, and here you go. This is what proves this is my car. That sort of thing. This is a tokenization of everything. Everything, every item, cars, computers, even clothes, food, and how it's developed. Everything is going to be tracked now, and for the better and the worse, right? For the better because this is going to clean up a lot of industries, folks. This is revolutionary in that a lot of corrupt behavior is going to be wiped out with this technology. But it's going to record everything. It's going to record everything. And that's why we're entering into this brand new sci-fi world, okay? So we also have financial services, which I've been talking about. Voting is a big one. It says here, using a blockchain code, constituents could cast votes via smartphone, tablet, or computer, resulting in immediately verifiable results. So in the same way, like you got to be verified to use Twitter or whatever, that same verification mechanism can be used with your phone because your phone has your phone number. That's your phone. You can use that to verify. Hey, this is me, and this is my vote. And so you have this triangulation between the corporation that distributed those phones, also any kind of account you have through anything like Twitter or any kind of other software, a phone number that may be attached to that device, and also your name and stuff like that, all that information usually, and also a bank that you might have connected to at some point. All this triangulating information can be used as a confidence factor in a one-to-one voting system and a platform in which everybody can see every vote coming in. The data, the ledger is completely wide open, so every vote is not only accounted for in the identification process, but once in, that vote can become anonymous, and all we do is tally. All we see is this public ledger tallying things in real time. There's no clear platform doing this yet, but if history is anything, everybody gets on Facebook, everybody gets on Instagram, everybody gets on. Look, not everybody, I get it, but more and more people who use this technology, what are they doing it for? For those larger social platforms. And as whatever this platform is going to be comes out and becomes established, look, it's still in its infant stages, folks. Like, this is brand new stuff. But people are going to use this to build these systems, okay? And probably different voting systems for different platforms. But everything is tracked. Lowering the barrier of entry, bringing down the curtain on a lot of the corruption, but also everything is tracked. Okay, and healthcare. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a big one. Patients' encrypted health information can be shared with multiple providers without the risk of privacy breaches, because there are no longer large databases with information containing everybody's names and addresses and phone numbers and email addresses and social security numbers. And this new way of things is much harder. You can't hack the whole thing. You just can't, because of the way the system is built. And it causes everybody to be more responsible for their data. This is also how automation is going to, destroy industries, or at least transform industries. Because of AI, because of automation and robots and things like that, this is the protocol that is going to control the robots, right? Make sure the robots all cooperate and have the same goal. And even, the information of certain robots that don't perform well or get damaged or have some kind of problem, we can immediately see that in the data sets that we collect, and we can address it. So this is, again, changing things. Now, people have said, like, hey, this AI revolutionary takeover, it's going to cause mass job loss. Yes, that's true. Okay, but this is part of the reason why I want to talk about this is because that transition period, if you start now, and if you understand how these things are going to be taken over, if you're in an industry where you know that you're going to be automated out, I think there are certain ways to position yourself. And I'm not saying this as specifically with any one thing or another. I'm more talking generally. There are certain ways to position yourself, to educate yourself, and to understand where things are going, where you can take advantage of these implications and these changes. And I'm not saying I know exactly what to do in your particular situation, but it's kind of like one of those things where you see a giant wave coming, and I've been out surfing before. If you've been surfing, there's a bunch of surfers that are sitting out there, they're waiting for the wave. When you see a wave coming, you know it's coming, right? If you sit there and do nothing, you can get totally wiped out by the wave. But you want to catch the wave, so you turn around, you start paddling, right? And you try to catch the wave. That's kind of what I'm saying. Like, hey, start paddling, start moving in the direction of where you want to go because this wave is coming. And that's kind of my point here. So the last thing I want to show you from this document is this page here where it talks about build the technology capabilities to get more intelligent about your customers' needs. This is like the Minority Report scene where, Tom Cruise is walking through and all the ads are tailored to him. That's basically what this is. And it says here by 2020, we expect that the new normal operating model will be customer and context centered. That is, companies will change the way they interact with their customers based on the context of the exchange. They will offer a seamless omni-channel experience through a smart balance of human and machine, and this will require the integration of massive amounts of situational data from mobile sources, smartphones, sensors, wearables, so on, and the ability to tie it to operational data such as transaction history and risk profiling. Interesting, right? And given sort of the red flag laws that they're talking about these days, this is very interesting. This is very dangerous, in my opinion. Another big change happening within the context of blockchain, the positives and the negatives here. And I want to highlight here it says 75% of banks are making investments in this area. This pattern is consistent globally, saying that 75% of companies are looking into AI and these types of data management systems that allow them to tailor make their advertising more towards the individual. Only 17% feel very prepared. So, as you can tell, this creates a whole different infrastructure, a whole different system. And after finding that document about Andrew Cuomo announcing, this relationship between Israel and New York, it made me think a little bit about what's really the regulations there surrounding that previously. Because I know that people in New York that live in New York had a very difficult time purchasing cryptocurrencies. A lot of different states, it's a lot easier for us to just buy cryptocurrency. Although, again, I'll talk about some of those on ramps in a moment. But people in New York were highly regulated and restricted from participating in certain ICOs, which are initial coin offerings that were a huge buzz a couple years ago, and other financial instruments and tools and just exchanges, things like that. New York has a lockdown in the world of cryptocurrency, which is why I thought it was very interesting that Israel all of a sudden comes in and partners with New York and says, hey, we're going to build this financial tech revolution thing together. We're going to share all of our data. Very strange. But in any case, according to this document from clsbluesky.law.columbia.edu, quote, we examine the recent trend of regulators establishing bilateral regulatory memoranda of understanding relating to fintech or fintech MOUs. Fintech MOUs are a very recent phenomenon. The first one was signed by the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, the ASIC, and the UK's Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, in March 2016. Over 30 fintech MOUs have since been signed by regulators, including the FCA, ASIC, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the MAS, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the HKMA, and the Council of Securities Regulators of Canada's provinces and territories, Canadian Securities Administrators, CSA. So I guess the word is out there that this type of cross border financial technology agreement has to be done in order for all of this to take place because ultimately the citizens were already doing it. And so a lot of this paperwork is just, making sure that they're allowed to do it. They are absolutely lagging in explaining to everybody what's really going on. So they're not going to really tell anybody what's going on because ultimately the technology that's rising is the destruction of a lot of these types of authorities. So they're going to try to come out and say, hey, this is allowed, this is not. But ultimately, if the governments and their central banks destroy their currency, their monetary systems within the country, the citizens are going to go to where they have freedom, where they have access. And that is in the realm of cryptocurrencies. It just is. It's crazy, but that's what's happening. And if you recall the late Joan Vion, she expressed this idea of a public private partnership that allowed foreign entities to come into the United States and begin financing our private sector, which trickled out into our politics. And that's why, China has all of our stuff and all that kind of thing. Well, the interesting thing about this emerging financial technology and cross border payments provided by cryptocurrencies and things like that is that it takes this concept of a PPP or a public private partnership, which again, at the time only concerned very wealthy people and large corporations. It lowers the bar of entry. It allows for anyone, even you and I, to use this idea of a public private agreement. Ultimately, the big bottom line here is that this technology is causing every single person out there in the world to become their own secret agent. I mean, that's really what's taking place, crudely speaking. But I've been looking at this stuff for a few years now, and I'm really seeing the positive and the negative of it. And that's why I want to share with you these things, because you guys need to be educated on what's happening so that we can build something together, build systems that allow for the gospel to be preached. That's kind of my passion, is to create a decentralized biblical platform that allows us to share the scriptures, share our commentary on the scriptures historically, but also our own commentaries. And also, I think it'd be great if we can create a sort of social media setting where within each passage or within each book or chapter, whatever way you want to break it down, there are threads of comments and people praying for each other, putting out prayer requests, things like that. I just think that we can build something very positive for the kingdom of God as this technology is developed. And I just don't see enough people talking about this technology in that regard, that there is this other side to it where we can create these safe havens. Because ultimately, think about it this way, okay? And this is sort of the conclusion, the big conclusion of some of my theories about how things might play out. But if we are going to live in a world where the dragon and the beast are able to go after the saints, they go to war with the saints and they overtake the saints, right? That means the people who are out there evangelizing, sharing the gospel, who are openly like, hey, Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior, they're going to be identified. And again, the technology is bringing down the veil. It really is, just metaphorically, but also literally, in that the things that we believe, the values that we have, the people that share those things are going to cluster themselves together in what they believe is the most capable type of infrastructure to support their needs. And you can see how we're almost creating this separate hive thing, the wheat and the tares literally separating. It's crazy how we have all these scriptures that talk about these eschatological ideas, and this one thing called the blockchain and the digital technology itself is totally bringing us to a place where we can see those prophecies manifest tangibly, quantified. I've kind of rambled for a while here, but before we dive deeper into the modern financial technology boom being led by places like Israel, I want to start by spending some time in the scriptures to give a little more grounding of biblical history and commentary as it pertains to the economic system in general, to take a step back and look at money and wealth as a means of what God says in the Bible. And I get that there are a lot of people that do this. You got your Dave Ramseys and you got other people, but I'm just doing my own little study here, and hopefully you guys get something out of it. And after that, I'll tie it back to what I started here with, in that agreement between New York and Israel in the financial tech sector. So, money. So, the monetary system has been the backbone of control over the human population for centuries. Money itself really is just, again, a medium of exchange. The object of that medium is really a mere social contract that the two people making the exchange agree upon. Currently, it's fiat money. Fiat simply means a formal authorization or proposition, a decree. Investopia states, quote, fiat money is government-issued currency that is not backed by a physical commodity such as gold or silver. The value of fiat money is derived from the relationship between supply and demand and the stability of the issuing government rather than the worth of a commodity backing it. Most modern paper currencies are fiat currencies. Now, here's the hypocrisy of people in the traditional sort of financial markets that come out and say, Bitcoin, there's nothing backing Bitcoin. Well, guess what, folks? Your fiat money is backed by nothing. Well, you can maybe argue it's backed by oil or backed by the government, the confidence of the people. But realistically, when it comes to tangible assets, it's nothing. In terms of Bitcoin, it's not nothing because it's sort of that bridge between the physical and this metaphysical digital realm, but it's computers. You have energy consumption. You have work in some cases, the proof of work system that Bitcoin works off of. Some people are trying to develop a proof of stake system where just owning and holding cryptocurrencies helps validate the entire system, the entire network. But your fiat money is not backed by anything, folks. It's just paper. And if everything goes down when, the doo-doo hits the fan, right? Is paper going to do anything? If I go to my neighbor, hey, I got these pieces of paper here. Hey, give me some food. Is that going to work? Probably not. Is gold and silver going to work? I think so. For a while. Yeah, absolutely. Especially silver. Okay. Silver is going to work beautifully because of the fact that it has a role to play in the technology, in the actual computing mechanisms. Gold does too, but silver comes much cheaper than gold and is able to help in the actual physical infrastructure of some of these systems. So look out for silver, as a lot of silver heads out there already. So anyway, that's what fiat is. This problem of a worldwide financial system backed up not by actual physical commodities like gold or silver has allowed very few to have unique power over the masses. And while the disparity between the powerful and the servitude have continued to increase, the spiritual influence behind the corruption has been with us since our first parents. And I've talked about this before. Cain created the first city named after his firstborn son Enoch. And I think you can see the spiritual depravity that is associated with Cain's line. And it's most apparent looking at just 5 generations after Cain, when Lamech became the first man recorded in the Bible to commit polygamy, marrying 2 women, Adah and Zillah, that's Genesis 4:19. And Lamech's progeny through Adah and Zillah, these 2 wives, were the establishers of certain disciplines. Genesis 4, verses 20 through 22. And Adah gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and raise livestock. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who play the harp and flute. Zillah also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, a forger of every implement of bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Now, of course, you have iron mixing with miry clay later on, talking about some of these issues. But you have tent dwelling and raising livestock, music and entertainment, metal smithing. These are all essentials for an industrialized civil human society. And again, all of it had this dark spiritual component to it, not just from Cain, the first human murderer, but also from Naamah, the sister of Tubal-Cain. So according to the succubus.net, which is an online central hub of all information associated with the succubus, and I don't recommend you go there and visit it because there's adult content there, but here's what they say about Naamah, coming from the dark side, if you will. They're their own words. Quote, Naamah, meaning pleasant, is a figure in the Bible and Jewish mysticism. In Gnostic Kabbalah, she is called Nehemah. She is described as being an angel of prostitution and one of the succubi mates of the archangel Samael in Zoharistic Kabbalah. Her fellow succubi are Lilith, Isheth Zenunium, and Agrat Bat Mahlat. She is also known as the mother of divination. She is also generally regarded as being the daughter of Lamech, but how she became a demon is unclear. End quote. Thank you, succubus.net. So, believe it or not, this description, this dark description of Naamah, has a remarkable consistency with the Bible and especially Bible prophecy. So, first off, she's described as being the angel of prostitution. Now, this is interesting because many passages in the Bible talk about the subject of prostitution, and they do so at various levels. In Deuteronomy 23:17, God is clear that no daughter of Israel is to be a temple prostitute, nor any son of Israel a sodomite. Quote, there shall be no whore of the daughters of Israel, nor a sodomite of the sons of Israel. But moreover, the Bible uses this language of prostitution to describe rebellious Israel. Leviticus 19, verse 29 tells us, you must not defile your daughter by making her a prostitute, or the land will be prostituted and filled with depravity. Interesting how it does the connection with individual prostitution of your daughter, but then that leading to the actual depravity of the land itself. Hosea 5:4, their deeds do not permit them to return to their God, for a spirit of prostitution is within them, and they do not know the Lord. What is going on there? The spirit of prostitution, is this the spirit of Naamah? So, as it's obvious here, there's a direct connection between the actual prostitution of the citizens of ancient Israel and the analogous prostitution of the land, but this also leads to the final prophecy written concerning this topic, and that's the harlot, the whore of Babylon, or Mystery Babylon. For those who believe Mystery Babylon is Rome, I don't think you're necessarily wrong, especially as it pertains to the potentialities of partial fulfillments and cyclical fulfillments. However, I've maintained that the detailed analysis of the scriptures describing Mystery Babylon reveals to us that it's likely describing an eschatological end times Jerusalem. And really, it's not hard to see when you start counting the number of times the city of Jerusalem is actually associated with being a harlot. Isaiah 121, how the faithful city has become a whore. She who was full of justice, righteousness lodged in her, but now murderers. Connecting back to Cain, the first murderer. Jeremiah 13:27, I have seen your abominations, your adulteries and neighings, your lewd whorings on the hills in the field. Woe to you, O Jerusalem! How long will it be before you are made clean? And this connects us to Revelation 17:5. And on her forehead was written a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and the earth's abominations. So certainly all of these passages remind us of the description of Naamah, as well as her forefather Cain being that murderer. So what does this have to do with money in general? Well, we know Mystery Babylon got rich from the selling of its goods, as outlined in Revelation 18:3. For all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Now, a lot of people say that this prophecy has already been fulfilled with a lot of the people, the elite, having this immense amount of wealth and spreading that corruption throughout the world. I agree. But there's also this eschatological fit where this seems to also apply. But if we pivot back to Naamah for a second and that esoteric description, she's also described as a succubi who mates with the archangel Samael, according to the Zoroastric Kabbalah, or the Zohar, right? So we know that Kabbalah is, pretty popular in American culture, but the individual of Samael, some of you guys might be familiar, is actually in the Bible, not directly named, but certainly this entity appears. According to the Jewish encyclopedia, Samael and his host of demonic entities, quote, descended from heaven to seduce the first human pair, and for this purpose he planted the vine, the forbidden tree of paradise. He was himself the serpent, whose form he merely assumed, and was one of the leaders of the angels who married the daughters of men, thus being partially responsible for the fall of the angels. Now, again, this is the Jewish encyclopedia. According to other outlets like Wikipedia, he's an important archangel in Talmudic and post-Talmudic lore, a figure who is the accuser, Ha-Satan, the seducer and destroyer, the Mashihit. And they have a description of him in Judaism, in Gnosticism, and also in the Anthroposophy, which says that Samael is known as one of the 7 archangels. And as you guys might know, I just had a baby a couple years ago, and it's been a huge blessing. It's a lot of fun. It's very stressful, but a lot of fun. And, it was kind of a process to try to figure out what to name my daughter. And, what I did, I started to look online for different names, what they mean and stuff like that. The name Samael, if you have any friends or family that have named their child Samael, might want to maybe go change it because according to thinkbabynames.com, Samael is, quote, Hebrew origin meaning venom of God. In the Talmud, an archangel of death and destruction known as the accuser, seducer, and destroyer, he is the equivalent of the biblical serpent who tempted Eve in Eden. He is also known as the prince of darkness and chief of the dragons of evil. End quote. So there you go. If you know someone named Samael, let's put the Antichrist alert up, or at least change that name. I don't think that's a good name for anybody. And finally, let me get back to Naamah here. She's described as the mother of divination, which is clearly something that has economic connections. Acts chapter 16 is the perfect example where Paul and Silas are confronted with a slave woman who is possessed by the spirit of Python. And Paul directs that spirit to leave the woman, which gets him and Silas into trouble because the owner of the slave girl lost their ability to make money. So there you go. The spirit, the mother of divination, Naamah, having a very strong influence in how commerce and trade and the economic infrastructure exists in the fallen world. So, in summary, for this little section here, the bloodline of the first murderer, Cain, produced Naamah, a sister of Tubal-Cain, who, along with her brothers, were the establishers of the first human city. She's remembered as the angel of prostitution, the mother of divination, and a succubus who mates with Samael, a watcher that's named in the book of Enoch, and a serpent, an accuser in Jewish mysticism, often associated with Ha-Satan in the Bible. So call me crazy, but I think this explains the dark spirituality that is behind the corrupt, evil elite who have a certain level of power and control over human civilization through the economic infrastructure. But it's not all doom and gloom here. Money itself is not just this tool that the enemy uses to control for evil purposes. God has his way of using money as well. So God's countermove includes lots of dealings with money and wealth. So we know that God mentions gold and other precious stones early in the scriptures in Genesis 2, verse 11. And by the time we get to Genesis 13:2, it says, Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. Now, this idea of being rich in cattle brings us back to Cain and Abel for a moment. And as we read about their job descriptions in response to the curse that was brought upon by God due to our disobedience. Genesis 4:2 states, Later she gave birth to Cain's brother Abel. Now Abel was the keeper of the sheep, while Cain was a tiller of the soil. So a keeper of the sheep and a tiller of the soil, which are both basic things required for the sustenance of life. So right away, God shows us what we were supposed to do in response to the curse, the responsibilities we had. It was instilled in Cain and Abel in terms of the basic requirements. But when it comes to wealth, God uses different people along the way, right? We just mentioned Abram, and we're going to go back to him here. So God has this great plan for a human Messiah and eventually the restoration of all creation, including man. So he chose Abram, who became known as Abraham. Genesis 18, verse 19, For I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. So Abraham was really physically and spiritually blessed, being considered the father of the faith. But it's clear that his wealth is actual tangible stuff. It's not a digital bank, right? It's things like livestock. It's actually having a healthy family that surrounds him. It's having herdsmen. It's having additional gold and silver, probably just stored somewhere, but being carried around, In verse 5 of Genesis 13, we read about how Lot shows up with his caravan, his whole crew, and decided to hang out with Abraham's caravan for a while. But they both had so many possessions that they were unable to coexist because, the herdsmen were fighting and stuff. So they split, and Lot goes towards Sodom before it was destroyed by God. And then Abram receives God's promise to make his progeny inherit all the land. And interestingly, verse 18 says, So Abram moved his tent and went to live near the oaks, sometimes translated plains of Mamre in Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. So the word for oaks or plains is the same word that means a terebinth, which is a type of tree in the ancient Near East. And in Hebrew, interestingly enough, that word is Elon. Now, since it says Abraham made an altar to the Lord, it would follow that he likely used the terebinth tree or wood from it to do so. So it's actually kind of weird if you think about the powerful people of today who might reside in the same spirit of Cain and Naamah would name one of their public elite progenies Elon, the material that Abram used to build an altar to the Lord. Makes you really think what their agenda is for this man. It's one of those thoughts that really makes you think like, hey, Elon, man, rip out whatever they got in your brain, repent, and seek Jesus Christ. You'll be free, I promise. We're going to need a lot more prayer warriors for that one. But the succession of biblical patriarchs are also well known for their wealth. According to biblia.org, quote, the biblical record suggests that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were exceedingly wealthy men. This is born of the fact that they owned both donkeys and camels. The rarity of domesticated camels in the Bronze Age Near East, combined with the economic advantages enjoyed by camel owners over non owners, along with the exclusive ability of the rich to initiate camel domestication and eventually to profit from it, provide a significant connection to the patriarchs as described in Genesis. Based on the overt description of the patriarchs' wealth, some scholars have surmised that they may have been traveling merchants using donkeys as their chief mode of transport. Sarna observed that the patriarchs had dealings with kings, possessed slaves, retainers, silver and gold, and might possibly have participated in the international caravan trade. So there you go. No place to rest your head and call home for Abram until the promised land. So it's interesting to think about how from Noah's Ark to the point of Abram, this wealth transfer was likely a sort of a rat race to occupy and cultivate the land and grow livestock and collect gold and silver. I mean, talk about first mover advantage. The earliest generations from Noah's three sons were likely busy accumulating all this wealth for themselves. And by the time God chose Abram to become Abraham, it was clear that Abraham's character in dealing with his wealth was in line with the Lord somehow, and that's why he was chosen. So it's interesting how the way we deal with our finances, no matter what the tangible items may be, is very apparent and shows our devotion or rejection or rebellion to God. And that struggle continues because although Abraham was blessed and he was wealthy, the same can't be said as the scriptures trace the lineage from Abraham down throughout the generations. None is more notable than King Solomon, the wealthiest and the wisest king in the Bible, who in 1 Kings 11 was described as falling under the weight of his problems with lust, which opened up worship of false gods. 1 Kings 11, verses 5 through 6 says, Solomon followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and unlike his father David, he did not follow the Lord completely. And so the remarkable dealings of God and working his promise despite all the rebellious activity of Solomon are well established in the following verses here. At the time, on a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to the gods. Now the Lord grew angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had warned Solomon explicitly not to follow other gods, Solomon did not observe what the Lord had commanded. Then the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this and have not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded you, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, for the sake of your father David, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom away from him. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. And it's interesting how there is this contrast where in the Old Testament, this narrowing down continues to take place until you have the birth of Jesus, who actually, the wise men brought him gifts. I think that had to do with whatever was left in sort of the wealth transfer that continued throughout the Old Testament, all the way back from perhaps even Adam or Enoch, but certainly since Abraham and some of the wealth that was there. So interesting to think that that was some kind of a stopping point. But then you have Jesus and you have the New Testament, which deals with money in a much more principled guideline type of way. So Matthew 6:24 is the perfect explanation and clear reason why so many of the wealthy patriarchs and kings like Solomon actually failed in the past. Okay, Matthew 6:24, very famous passage. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So we know that the love of money produces all kinds of evil, and that, along with this idea that you can't serve two masters, this becomes very evident in all the shortcomings of the Old Testament, especially Solomon, right? And a continued blueprint as to how the mixture of that civilized spirit of Na'amah coming from Cain, mixing in with the chosen path of Israel, how there was always a move, counter move, as L.A. Marzulli talks about, and this war, this battle to take people away. Solomon seems to be one who was very wise and was very wealthy, but lost some of the ability to maintain it and carry it forward. He did not please the Lord, he rejected him, and so destruction followed. And of course, the parable of the talents in Matthew 25 is also a great example of how God entrusts more to those who would be responsible enough to handle it. So, not simply to hold it, but also create ways of ethical trade to gain more in return. Now, it's easy to reject such a notion that, like, hey, God actually entrusts more money to more people that know how to deal with it, because obviously, if we look at the economic food chain, it's very corrupt. It's more corrupt as you go up. But the wisdom found in the parable is that what you do with whatever wealth you are blessed with actually matters. Now, this all comes to a head in Matthew 19, where Jesus is confronted by a rich young ruler, and he asks what he needs to do to obtain eternal life. And after going back and forth a little bit, Jesus says in the end that if he wants to be perfect, go and sell all that he has, give to the poor, and come follow him, since he'll have treasure in heaven. And of course, this is another famous passage where the rich young ruler walks away despondent, sorrowful. And I really like David Guzik's commentary here, where he states, quote, "We may make two mistakes here. The one is to believe this applies to everyone, when Jesus never made this a general command to all who would follow him, but especially to this one rich man whose riches were clearly an obstacle to his discipleship. Instead, many rich people can do more good in the world by continuing to make money and using those resources for the glory of God and the good of others. The second mistake is to believe this applies to no one, when there are clearly those today for whom the best thing they could do for themselves spiritually is to radically forsake the materialism that is ruining them." But really, all of this goes back to our inability to serve two masters. Humans have failed to uphold God's standards of responsibility throughout time. And if we're applying the concept to a larger arc of human history, the scriptures are true that this same thing is leading us to Mystery Babylon. And I think this is where, a lot of these issues come up, and the topic of crypto is interesting because it's truly going to be a transfer of wealth in a sense. A lot of people who don't have money are going to suddenly be able to generate digital money that they can use to sustain themselves. So, really, again, God could bless people in this life, in this world, but really it's what you do with it. Are you going to be like Solomon, tremendously blessed, but ultimately rejected because he did the alternative? And what's that alternative? The alternative is actually you're not serving God, you're actually serving death itself and all the darkness, like the spirit of Na'amah associated with it. When Satan tempts Jesus in the desert in Matthew 4, verse 7, it states again, the devil took him to a high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these I will give you if you fall down and worship me. And so what's really going on here is the devil desiring worship, because it's going to leave humanity astray. It's going to point them away from God. And it's really interesting that the people who have rejected God in this world today, while they don't necessarily worship the devil openly, some are, but not everybody that's in that camp, they think they can actually buy the gift of God. And this is really the point of transhumanism. Okay, you have Acts 8:20. It says, "But Peter said to him, may your silver perish with you, because you thought you could obtain the gift of God with money." A lot of the elite people that have a lot of wealth, they think they can buy the gift of God with their wealth. And that's why we have transhumanism as part of this movement and part of the thing that is needed for this boom in financial technology. And to be quite 100% transparent with my opinions, I think that they can't even go in that direction of a true transhuman future without first allowing everybody to participate in the economic infrastructure side of it. So, this is where I want to really get into more of the modern monetary system, what we've been looking at for a long time. We know that there's a crash upon us. The artificially held up fiat based economy was doomed to fail from the start. And getting off the gold standard in 1971 invited all sorts of corrupt financial instruments that are centralized in computing software using derivative trading that can manipulate and control vast economic markets. And up until last decade, there really wasn't much a typical citizen, especially in America, can do about it other than maybe buy some gold and some silver and just sit there and wait. Cash allowed us to remain anonymous to a degree, but even then, cash is really just an IOU. It's worthless paper, like I mentioned earlier. If we enter into some kind of post apocalyptic wasteland, paper money will eventually become used to burn for heat or maybe for toiletries. And that's the reality of the situation. It's just paper. In response to this failing system, during the depth of the economic crash of 2008, a white paper was published that promised to end this corruption. And that's the Bitcoin white paper, written by a mysterious figure named Satoshi Nakamoto. Some think he's a rogue programmer. Other people have said that it's a group of people. Others think it's the CIA. But in it, it demonstrated mathematical proofs that would allow decentralization of digital currency in a way that's never been done before. First, it solved the double spending issue where digital units of currency could not be copied over and over again. That's part of the issue with digital stuff, right? You can just copy it over and over. And instead of one central computing warehouse controlling the markets through their digital fiat, Bitcoin allows anyone in the world to volunteer their computing power as a means to maintain consensus of the network, which records all the transactions on an open ledger using what has popularly been realized as blockchain. Even though the transactions are public, the owners of the wallets, unless they publicly identify themselves or associate with the wallet, are anonymous. But even more, Bitcoin represents a shift into a supernatural and metaphysical existence, since while Bitcoin is not a tangible substance like gold, one can hold the keys to access any given Bitcoin wallet by simply memorizing their private keys. A lot of people write theirs down, but in reality, you can memorize that key. And when it comes down to it, guess where that money or access to that particular wallet is stored? If it's not stored on paper, if it's not stored on a computer, where's that information stored? In your mind. You don't have to call up your bank and like, hey, I want my money. No. The key to access your account can be memorized in your brain. Now, it's important to keep in mind that all really Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, all that they're doing is represent a new medium of exchange. Money is really just money. It's the object by which the transfer of value takes place. And while we have all agreed that this paper that we have is money, when we use it as cash, it's really just the medium of exchange that we have all agreed to at this point in history. And all the people that leverage criticism against Bitcoin and say it's not real, it's not based on anything, those ideas are inaccurate. Because not only is there a monetary demand associated with Bitcoin, people speculating for whatever reason, right? But its foundation is based on mathematical information in the form of software and unique human accessibility to that software. Now, again, this has both tremendous destructive power in a good way and a bad way. So, if the whole world decides that central banking controlled government systems, oil backed, ugly digital fiat money, if everybody in the world just says, we're not using that anymore, the two-party system is all tied to it. They have control over who gets the money. The government always takes a chunk. The bank always takes a chunk. The system is built in a way that Andre Antonopoulos, if you guys have heard of him, he made a really important point in one of his recent speeches. He said that the system currently attracts the psychopaths, the sociopaths. It attracts them to climb the corporate ladder because they can see that the infrastructure, the way things work, is bent towards those who crave power, who crave control. That's how it is. And his point about Bitcoin is something that I tend to agree with, although not with everything. The basic part that If everyone decides to not use that and use Bitcoin instead, there is nothing those central banks and those powers can do. Nothing. They can't do anything because we have all agreed to reject it and to accept this new form, this more free and open form of money. However, there's a big however. The systems that can be built on top of these emerging currencies like Bitcoin could cause a large problem, as the legacy systems will do everything to play gatekeeper and controller of their own current systems. Anytime a dollar is turned into Bitcoin, they are losing their supply, right? They can continue to print as much as they want, but really they're losing that amount of fiat power, their leverage, to a commodity, an asset like Bitcoin that is actually limited in supply and is deflationary by nature. But this transition is going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight. And this is where a lot of my opinions about biblical prophecy concerning eschatology, Jerusalem, and Mystery Babylon, it all kind of comes together here. So the emergence of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies has really created a hasty emotional movement of futurists, innovators, entrepreneurs, investors, and other powerful influencers to start building the infrastructure for this emerging economic system. There are total scams out there. Others are really ambitious to the tune of billions invested with not a single product to show for it, as of yet. But the movement is present and palpable. It's happening. The leading nation in this regard is Israel. In an article published in July of 2018 titled Israel Quickly Becoming the Leading Fintech Hub, it states, quote, from its origin as a 90s startup, $13 million capital sector, the Israeli financial industry has grown to include approximately 500 fintech startups, collectively raising an estimated total of $500 to $650 million to date. According to a report by Deloitte, Israel is quickly becoming a premier fintech hub in line with Silicon Valley, Singapore, and London. And later in the article, it states among these are the Israeli Bitcoin Embassy, which promotes the use, development, and regulation of Bitcoin, Barclays community space Rise Tel Aviv, which recently partnered with the 5,000 member strong FinTech Aviv community, The Floor, a vertical focused fintech hub backed by Chinese investment firm the Pando Group aimed at connecting the Israeli fintech industry with Asian markets. Ding, ding, ding. We have China in connection with Israel, and Israel connecting with New York. See what's taking place here? And Beehive Tel Aviv, a fintech hub launched in 2017 to connect Israeli and Belgian fintechs. Interesting, the Beehive, the hive mind. Another platform is Deloitte's Innovation Tech Terminal, the ITT, which connects Israeli innovation with Deloitte's global clients. So here we go. Everything is connecting. The borderless stuff is happening. And as I mentioned, this is worldwide. So Israel is rising and is becoming one of the top of the fintech industry next to Silicon Valley, Singapore, and London, with one of their main focuses being Bitcoin's on ramp and off ramp. Now, keep in mind, they can't necessarily control Bitcoin. They can own a lot of Bitcoin, they can buy Bitcoin now, but they can't control the actual Bitcoin network. They can only create on top of it on ramps and off ramps. Okay, keep that in mind. I continue on here. In 2017, Mashable reported that Israel is looking to launch their own private cryptocurrency in a few years. Quote, the Bank of Israel is looking to issue a digital currency to create a faster payments system as well as reduce the country's reliance on cash, according to an anonymous source that spoke to Reuters. This national cryptocurrency would be very different from Bitcoin, however. Reuters' source claims it would be centralized, safe, and in accordance with Israel's money laundering rules. Bitcoin, in contrast, is decentralized and anonymous, end quote. So there you go. This is akin and in line with every other traditional system here. The Bank of Israel looking to issue their own digital currency, and it's going to be centralized, but it's going to comply with all of their rules. And so it's possible that everyone's going to use it anyway because, hey, it's signed off. But if you read the definition of fiat earlier, right? Government issued some sort of authority, a decreed system of money. That's the exact same thing that the Bank of Israel is trying to do. If it's centralized, safe, in accordance with their monetary laundering rules, it's basically in compliance with the Bank of Israel, which means that this is fiat by definition. right? It's not a cryptocurrency. They're just using that title to get people to use it. And here's the deal, guys. I know people say, hey, but cash is more anonymous than this stuff. Like you said, everything gets recorded. Yes, it's true when it comes to Bitcoin. When it comes to Litecoin, a lot of these major coins do have a public ledger that is recorded. However, there are projects out there like Monero, like Zcash to an extent, or others like Aeon, or now we have Grin, which was built on Mimblewimble, which mathematically proved a way in which cryptocurrency transactions can take place and keep the P2P side of it private and the amount private and all these things. There's all sorts of innovations happening to where cryptocurrencies will effectively work like cash, anonymous P2P exchange. So keep that in mind, okay? Bitcoin is not anonymous, although people have wanted to build anonymous layers on top of it, and there are ways to create anonymous layers on top of it. I think as we go into the labeling of addresses, there's going to be a layer of protection. And what I mean by that is something like unstoppable domains. If you guys don't know about it, it's built on the Zilliqa platform. So instead of .com, it's .zil. And basically, with some of these domains, you can attach a Bitcoin address to it. Now, I actually don't know about the privacy situation with that, but in terms of where it's headed, instead of giving you my public address of like these strings of numbers and letters, I can just say, hey, go to facelikethesun.zil to, give me any Bitcoin. That's what's coming around the corner. Now, getting back to Israel, we've seen some hackers come out of Israel as well when it comes to the financial technology advancement. Quote, the perp 31-year-old Eliyahu Gigi from Tel Aviv reportedly stole Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Dash from various foreigners, including Belgians, Dutch, and Germans, Israeli news reports. Gigi is facing charges of theft, fraud, aggravated counterfeiting, use of a forged document, perjury, money laundering, and income tax offenses. And there was more about him and his brother here in another article on Coin Telegraph. Quote, one of the most prominent crypto cybercrimes in recent years took a dramatic turn on June 23rd when two Israeli brothers were arrested in connection with the 2016 Bitfinex hack and other crypto-related phishing attacks. Just shy of 120,000 bitcoins were stolen in the attack back in 2016, an amount initially worth $72 million, although no, it's much more now, which just as a show of reference, it was $72 million worth in 2016. Today in 2019, it's worth almost 1.4 billion. Okay. So people that have invested in Bitcoin have already gotten rich. One of the most headline grabbing aspects of the arrest was the announcement that Eli Gigi, I guess Eli is the same as Eliyahu, the elder of the two brothers, had received specialist training from an elite technological unit of the Israeli Defense Forces. Oh, there you go. Ding, ding, ding. We have individuals who were trained and operated in the IDF out there hacking people for their crypto. I mean, this guy's probably rogue, but you never know. You never know if he was, part of the plan to create chaos. Very possible to push an atmosphere where the governments still control everything. Their own cryptocurrency. Don't use Bitcoin. Use our own bank issued cryptocurrency, which is the same thing as fiat. So the article goes on and actually denies any special ability associated with the IDF training. So, yeah, I think it's interesting. And I think it does suggest that they are trying to create a situation where they can provide the groundwork for implementing state controlled legislation. But again, it's not so black and white when it comes to the reality of cryptocurrencies. It's creating a mixture of events depending on context, location, and how long they've been occupying incorruption in traditional financial systems. Yahoo reported, quote, months after Palestine's current government was sworn in, the prime minister has revealed plans to develop a cryptocurrency meant to reduce dependence on Israel. According to Anadolu Agency, the Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh stated that the digital currency will assist the territory to overcome the challenges currently being experienced as a result of the over reliance on the Israeli shekel. In a loosely translated statement, Shetaya said that this was part of the Palestinian National Authority's e government plans. So, again, not so clear in black and white. Now, this use of government currency is to get away from the Israeli issued currency. So, again, look, this is chaotic, folks. They're really creating chaos out of this. So we can see that the economic leverage that can be practiced with the advent of cryptocurrencies is quite substantial. Again, we didn't really have this ability for governments to try to go away from the controllers or controlling nations and create their own independent thing. Now, again, you can argue that, within that country, that technology can be used for spying and all this kind of stuff. Yes, again, it's all double edged. Everything is double edged. You can use it for positive, you can use it for negative. And in reality, folks, it's been like that since the fall. The knowledge of good and evil meant that we can act in good or evil with anything around us. So we got to keep that in mind here. In the case of Palestine, or at least the Palestinian prime minister and their national authority plans with e government, they're trying to get to a place of freedom and sovereignty from the economic influence of Israel. And just so you guys know about this, and I'm sure some of you guys who are familiar with the markets and follow money and stuff like that, you guys know that countries like China, like Russia, they've been doing the same thing to the US dollar. They've been buying up gold, they've been probably buying up Bitcoin too, and they've been basically taking stake in other assets and trying to dump the US dollar because it's really losing its ground as the world reserve currency. And just to give you my honest opinion here, Trump came out a few weeks ago and talked about cryptocurrency and how it's bad. That tells me he's probably getting cryptocurrency. And I say that because the pattern of a lot of these elite guys like Jamie Dimon, who a year ago was like, anyone who's buying or trading Bitcoin is fired. And a year later, he came out with his own cryptocurrency and said he was, buying Bitcoin. So these guys lie about this all the time. And the fact that Trump said bad things about it, that tells me he's buying some. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Again, the ledger is public. You can go in there and start looking around, see if you can tie certain individuals to certain transactions, although that's hard to do. And there are already government agencies trying to do that. And of course, the big thing has been Facebook Libra. The last month or two, people have been freaking out about it, all kinds of stuff. Even the US government bringing in people to try to figure out what's going on with all this stuff. It was all just a crock of nonsense. None of them knew what was going on. Nobody was talking. It was just a waste of time. But in reality, what Facebook is trying to do with their Merkle tree data structure and their whole system there, they're trying to create a system that has behavioral controlled economics tied into all of the rest with the data that they have from Facebook. So no surprises there, but hey, guess who shows up in some of these early developments of the Libra token, according to Forbes.com? Quote, the first wallet to support the test version of Libra is Zengo, a mobile app available on iTunes and has support for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Built by Israeli-based KZen Networks and backed by $4 million in venture capital from investors, including Forbes Blockchain 50 member Samsung, the wallet will let users experience what it feels like to send and receive Libra when it launches in 3 weeks. It should be the first ever consumer-grade Libra wallet available to all, says Zengo CEO Oriel Ohayan. So Forbes has their Blockchain 50 and Samsung is one of its members, and they're the ones pumping money into this Israeli-based project that will be the first to carry Libra token as one of their things to trade off stuff. And again, the technology, it doesn't even matter if it works or not. The fact that this is being reported suggests that there's an agenda behind it. Now, Israel becoming a leader in financial technology means that they'll also be the hub for criminal activity. As we just saw with the hacker brothers arrested earlier, he's not alone. Quote, German and Austrian police have carried out one of the largest operations to date against alleged online financial scammers. German public television reported earlier this month a joint German-Austrian team has in recent months carried out 35 raids in 5 countries and investigated 10 suspects in connection with 5 allegedly fraudulent online trading websites, the report said. The 5 online trading sites being investigated by German and Austrian police are Option 888, Trade Invest 90, X Markets, Zoom Trader, and Tradovest, according to a July 3rd report. Most of these sites are or were associated with Tradeologic, an Israeli-funded and run Bulgaria-based online trading platform. In a related arrest, Israeli Gal Barak was apprehended in Bulgaria in February at the behest of Austrian prosecutors. At the time, Austrian prosecutors announced that they had raided the offices of 6 other Tradeologic websites. They include XTrader FX, Option Stars Global, Golden Markets, Safe Markets, and CryptoPoint. The report described the alleged fraudsters as employing methods identical to those of Israel's binary options industry, which was banned by the Knesset in October 2017, but which continues to operate from Israel and other countries under the guise of Forex, crypto, or derivatives trading websites. Now, of course, criminals come from every corner of the earth, from every nation, but just like any disruptive technology, like guns, for example, those who have access and ability to distribute and externalize that tech has first mover advantage. And in this case, Israel seems to be ahead of the game because their criminals are out there doing this and they're taking advantage of not having legislation. They're taking advantage of these systems. And of course, certain people have to go down for it. But this goes to show how much of the other things that are out there are also scams. How many other trading platforms and things of that nature are scams. And again, this is separate from the cryptocurrencies themselves, like Bitcoin. It doesn't mean Bitcoin is corrupt. It means the people, the services that are built on top of it, like exchanges, those are often very much corrupt and are using the same type of derivative market trading and manipulating the markets that existed before. And obviously, people that have a lot of Bitcoin can manipulate the market. There are no laws or rules against the cryptocurrency market because it's just this open thing. It's 24/7. It's not like the stock exchange where it stops every day. This is worldwide and it is 24/7. It doesn't end. And we got to keep in mind here, Bitcoin's been around for 10 years as of this recording, over 10 years now. And Israel's been part of this change for the entire decade, really, very quietly. In 2015, this Israeli 21C article lists 4 Israelis who found themselves as part of the top 100 leaders in emerging financial technology. And in 2008, during the economic crash, Israel was taking over the cybersecurity world. If you take a look at this Computer Weekly article, and in the article, it states Israel's economy continues to grow strongly and increasingly demand from the international market for its technological expertise plays a big part in this. In 2005, almost half of the total industrial exports were technology based. Today, Israel's entrepreneurs lead the way in many fields of software application and homeland security. So, why so many information security companies founded and developed in Israel? Quote, that is like me asking you why there are so many umbrella manufacturers in the UK, says Israel Levi, president and chief executive of Control Guard. Quote, we need security here like you need umbrellas in the UK. And this is where it gets geopolitical, folks. Nur Zamir, vice president of marketing for information security from Yogi, agrees that Israel's wealth of knowledge about information security is in line with its strong army and military might. Nick Outeridge is the director of business development for IT security company PureSight and is the Israeli company's only British member on staff. He said, quote, Israel needs superior security having survived the Holocaust. It sharpens minds. What they have suffered has given them the edge. That's an interesting comparison there. And the tentacles go far, folks. They go very, very far. According to this section called Foreign Investment, Bill Gates explains why Microsoft has established an office in Ra'anana. Quote, for Microsoft, having a research and development center in Israel has been a great experience. The quality of the people here is fantastic. So Microsoft has a location in Israel. With reasons such as motivated staff and an innovative atmosphere backed by government-funded research and development programs, Cisco, Motorola, and eBay have also invested in Israeli technology. And it goes on and on. So let me get back to the document I started with here. September of 2019, this is going to become official here, the Fintech partnership with the Bank of Israel in New York. Again, let me read this for you one more time. Governor of the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo, and Israel's 3 financial regulators, supervisor of banks at the Bank of Israel, head of Abur, head of capital markets, insurance, and savings authority, Moshe Baraket, and chairwoman of Israel's Security Authority, Anat Guetta, today announced an agreement between New York State Department of Financial Services and Israel's regulators to encourage and enable cross-border innovation in financial services technology, or fintech. The purposes of the agreement is to encourage fintech innovation in New York and Israel by providing support to fintech companies and to enable information sharing regarding this fast-developing domain. So if we read between the lines with some of this stuff, this feels more like an infiltration of a foreign financial system into the so-called financial capital of the world, New York, although they've been going at it for a while now. And again, this concerns the on ramps and off ramps to changing the fiat into digital currencies like Bitcoin. And for right now, there are certain places you can buy Bitcoin. You can go to Coinbase, you can go to Coin Mama, which is a broker in Israel. Okay. All the on ramps are basically controlled by companies that come out of Israel. And it's already happening. If you use an application of any kind, or at least most of them, I haven't really found one that doesn't use this system to purchase or change your fiat money into Bitcoin. Now, again, there's a couple different ways to do this. There are OTC ways, which is over the counter, which basically you get connected with someone that has Bitcoin and you meet them face to face and you give them cash and they give you the private keys to that Bitcoin wallet that contains that amount, or they can send to your wallet the amount of Bitcoin that you paid for, and you can do this in person. But the other way, the more regulated way to do this, because everyone has credit and they have debt. Basically, they have digital cash in their bank accounts. The way in which you change that into Bitcoin is much more controlled. And the company called Simplex is one of those off ramp, on ramp places where pretty much it's integrated into all kinds of systems. So if you want to buy a certain amount of Bitcoin or certain cryptocurrencies, Simplex has been integrated into most of the systems that are out there in America right now, anyway, and around the world. Again, I haven't found an application or platform that really doesn't use this when it comes to turning cash, turning dollars into Bitcoin. And again, this is not to say anything negative about the people that work at Simplex or the company or anything like that. I'm just looking at this from a 1,000-foot view of how things are going and commenting and reflecting my personal opinions on the issue. And if you go to the Simplex website here, you have this logo design, which is interesting. It's a 7-pointed star. Now, the 7-pointed star has many different meanings in different cultures, but according to the Kabbalistic tradition, it represents the sphere of Venus and the power of love. And you can find all kinds of more esoteric descriptions and uses of the 7-pointed star on the internet. But I do think it's interesting here, and it talks about who they are. They're a fintech company that provides worldwide fraud free payment processing with a proven track record in high fraud markets. Simplex technology enables merchants, marketplace, and crypto platforms to process online payments with complete fraud protection and chargeback coverage. So they're trying to be this official gateway with protections to transfer money into cryptocurrencies and other assets. Places that use this: Binance, one of the biggest cryptocurrency exchanges out there; Bitmart, KuCoin, Zoppo, CoinFlip, Cross Exchange, BTCC, ChainJelly, Mycelium, Cointelegraph, Paybis. I think there's others too that aren't listed here, but you wouldn't necessarily know that they're from Israel if you just look at the website itself. But if you go to a page like this is finder.startupnationcentral.org. There's an outline here of Simplex when they got started, and it clearly states that they're doing work from the nation state of Israel. And they already have a branch in Lithuania. This was back in 2017. And really, there hasn't been a whole lot of news from them other than this thing that they're really, integrating into all sorts of businesses and platforms that are trying to help people change their fiat, especially credit or debit, into Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. There are certain things, folks, that I find out about, and I just think, man, no way that that's real. And then I find out it's real. And look, it may be just an unfortunate coincidence, although I don't necessarily believe in coincidences per se, okay? But the CEO of Simplex is named Nimrod Lehavi. He looks like a nice guy. He looks like someone just trying to do good stuff. And look, I get it, not saying he's the Antichrist. I'm not saying he's evil. But man, just why? Why does his name have to be Nimrod? You know what I mean? It's just a spiritual thing, in my opinion. But there you have it. Israel is really at the forefront of this changing financial technology landscape. And they've already been building well before anybody really knew about cryptocurrencies or cared about them. They've been building this infrastructure slowly. They're going to be one of the leaders. And I think that fits certain eschatological passages alluding to mystery Babylon and fornicating with the kings of the earth. And I really do think that it's possible. I'm not saying it is, but definitely possible that this New York and Israel relationship to share information and data between the two to innovate and create the fintech infrastructure. I really do think that has something to do with the fornication of Mystery Babylon with the kings of the earth, like the beast. And we know that the beast takes advantage of Mystery Babylon. And certainly, if, some people believe the United States is that first beast, that's definitely possible. I don't necessarily think it's one country, but even if you don't, you can tell that these types of connections that are taking place, the developments that are happening economically, are leading to that end. And I think the conclusion I want to land on here is that we really do have a role to play in this. We have an opportunity to make sure that the gospel is spread in this time. And as much as possible within these types of communication and information transfer highways. We're basically building a new information highway, Web 3.0, right? And we really got to make sure that the word of God, the gospel, is in there. And through that, we can probably help a lot of people around the world at the same time. We can act on the Great Commission in a much more tangible way, in a way that we didn't have access to before. A lot of times we may have needed government regulations to agree with certain things that we wanted to do to help people in another country. Those sorts of barriers are slowly going away. And of course, it's not gone. The technology is there for us to do certain things, but those regulations are still there. The battle is still being fought, and it's only going to get worse. And the volatility is only going to get worse. And I think that this is all prophetic in nature and not suggesting we know a certain day or time, his return. The only person that knows is the Father in heaven. And really, he's the one that's going to dictate all of this. But I do think we have a responsibility to play here. And part of my doing in making these videos is to inform you that there is a lot more prophetic undertones to all the stuff going on, especially in the changes of financial technology. And it really does level the playing field between technology, the world of economics, the world of politics and geopolitics, and ultimately, even the religious part of it, I think is going to be a major factor in how certain systems develop and continue to build and eventually produce a man of sin that will have some kind of resurrection, perhaps, or some kind of thing that he returns from a mortal head wound. And again, there could be some more allegorical applications to that passage even now, even in terms of eschatological context, not just an individual. But in any case, after that, there will be a false prophet, a second beast that will point to this first beast and have everybody worship this first beast and have everybody take the mark in order to buy or sell within this particular economic infrastructure that will be created. And we're leading in that direction very quickly. So hope you guys get something out of this. I know it's a little bit longer, but think of this as kind of a Bible study / commentary on world events, and just being watchful. And really the warning for those people that are going to continue to build this: don't take the mark. Simple as that. Don't worship the beast. Don't take the mark in your right hand or in your forehead. Have an awesome day, guys. God bless.